The Spiritual Hierarchy by Alan Douglas, read by Dave Marsland of Cardiff Theosophical Society. This article is written in response to a question from an inquirer. Please explain exactly what is meant by the expression spiritual hierarchy. That seems to be only a name for something, and a name implies a story. If you speak of the 49ers, it is understood that you are referring to the whole dramatic story of the gold rush to California in 1849. No two people would tell it exactly the same way, but the main facts are known to everyone, and so the name is a convenient manner of referring to all of the facts and events of the story. Hierarchy is another name that refers to a set of facts known to everybody. It means that everything in the world as we know it has two opposite extremes and a number of other points between the extremes. The tallest man in the world is about 8 feet and 8 inches high, and the shortest is perhaps 2 feet and 4 inches. But there are also men of every other height between these two extremes. Everything we know grades itself from greatest to least. In all of the differences of quality, differences of size, of weight, colour, hardness, elasticity, endurance, power, beauty, generosity, nobility, integrity, and so forth. When I was a boy, we could get 3 kinds of anthracite coal. Lehi, a hard white ash coal, Lackawanna, a medium hard yellow ash coal, or Franklin, a soft red ash coal. The 3 kinds of coal looked so different that it was easy to tell them apart. Anybody who understood about coal knew what kind of a fire the Franklin coal would make, how long it would burn, how much clinker it would make on the grate, and how easily the ash fell through and cleared the fire. The name was a convenient way of indicating a certain grade of coal that had certain qualities. In using these names, we do not give any qualities or take any away. The names only recognise differences which really exist. Sit on the top rail of a corral where 50 yearlings are trotting around, and if there is an experienced horseman beside you, he will point out the qualities of these colts as they pass. In half an hour he would have those 50 horses all graded in his own mind into half a dozen grades of comparative excellence. The chemist recognises the different grades of matter by the atomic weights of the elements, from the light and self-satisfied gases like helium to the heaviest of the metals like uranium. The physicist classifies the forces of sound, electricity, heat, light, wireless and radioactivity by the length and frequency of the wave in the ether, which is characteristic of these different forces. The way in which the elements grade themselves in regular sequence by their atomic weights, and the forces by their wavelengths and frequencies, is so well known that where vacancies occur in either series, it is possible to predict with some accuracy the necessary characteristics of these undiscovered elements or forces. This series of the 92 elements, beginning with hydrogen and ending with uranium, has a name which calls attention to the natural relationships existing through the whole series. It is called the periodic table of the elements. If we choose to consider that the series begins at the top with that powerful radioactive element uranium and ends at the bottom with hydrogen, then a perfectly good name for this series would be the hierarchy of the elements. Today, it would be almost useless to ask a physicist to talk with you about the hierarchy of the elements, because he would not understand what you meant by that name. After you had explained a little, he would probably say, "Oh yes, you mean Mendeleev's table of the periodic table." 20 years from now, or even 10 perhaps, your question would probably be understood without explanations, because, as Madame Blavatsky announced in 1888, the behaviour of that element uranium has so completely overthrown the theories of modern science about the structure of matter that a few of the physicists are turning to the writings of the much derided alchemists, and even to the ancient teachings of occultism, in the hope of finding some clue to the real law of the elements. 35 years ago, the secret doctrine told scientists very plainly and forcibly that they would need to accept and study and understand the occult teaching about the hierarchy of beings and powers in the invisible world before they would be able to understand, by analogy, the elements and forces of the visible world. The name hierarchy is used only about individual conscious beings, either in the invisible world or in the visible world. But consciousness cannot be weighed or measured or even detected by the instruments of the laboratory, and therefore physical science says that it has no evidence of consciousness in the elements, and no evidence at all of the existence of an invisible world. How then will science ever suspect that it is the different grades of consciousness in the elements and in everything else in the universe that really determine all those qualities by which one element or one star is known from another? The inquirer then asks, do you mean then that the grade of consciousness in a rock or a tree, in a man or in a star or in a great celestial being is what determines the grade to which they belong? Alan Douglas replies, except for the consciousness in every atom, what could govern the evolution of substance or enable matter to obey the laws of matter? The inquirer then comments, then if the elements, like hydrogen, sodium and mercury, arrange themselves in regular grades by their atomic weights, and if the elements are really graded by the consciousness in them, I should think that the consciousness itself must be graded in some very definite way. Alan Douglas responds, why not indeed? The inquirer continues, then if mercury has an atomic weight of 200, there must be a grade of consciousness which we might call number 200. Alan Douglas responds, and why not? The inquirer then speculates, but if we found a plant with a consciousness of number 2000, I might think that there was some relation between the mercury and the plant, just because there was such an obvious relation between the numbers representing their grades of consciousness. Alan Douglas then asks the inquirer, does that seem to you an illogical inference? The inquirer responds to this by saying, I would not know where to stop. If there were men on earth with consciousness that was some multiple of number 200, and a planet in the sky, and a great master and his chelas in the lodge, all with a multiple of the Mercury's number 200 consciousness, then I should think that they were all related in some special way. Alan Douglas then says, would you be willing to add to the story that those men on earth were the devoted servants of the great master, and that they knew him and were guided by his wishes? The inquirer agrees and says, indeed yes, I am sure they would be that. Alan Douglas now continues, then I think you have been talking about the spiritual hierarchy with its source in the real world, and its life and power streaming down into this world which we foolishly call our own. But we must remember that this is not a decimal but a septenary world, and that all real relations are matters of likeness. Spiritual hierarchy is the name for something much older than this planet, because it describes the organisation of the Great Lodge of Masters as seen from below. The word hierarchy seems to have been used first by Dionysius the Areopagite at some time during the first 7 centuries of this era, and translated literally from the Greek means the government of the gods, or the rule of the holy ones. It is such an admirable word that students of Theosophy use it often. In the course of time, the word may be freed from its current misuse. Dionysius wrote a book of 15 chapters entitled Concerning the Celestial Hierarchy, and another book of 7 chapters concerning the ecclesiastical hierarchy. His statement is that God is the ultimate source of life and of all the powers which constantly are streaming down to men. A part of this flood of life, creative energy and will, comes direct from God to all mankind. Another part of this flood of power and guidance flows downwards to individual men through orders of meditating beings who are the servants of the divine will. Dionysius taught that between God and man there were ranged 3 triads of the celestial hierarchy: seraphim, cherubim and thrones; dominations, virtues and powers; principalities, archangels, angels. That whole list of names is worth a very careful looking up in the standard Theosophical books, and as we study them, surely we shall try to remember that understanding is the fruit of love, and that love comes only through service. Nobody ever tried with all his heart to serve the eternal without attracting the attention of somebody in the spiritual hierarchy. In response to this, the enquirer asks, and would he know it if he had attracted the attention of anyone like that? Alan Douglas concludes by saying, perhaps he might not think of it in just that way, but in time, at the right time, how could he fail to know?